Have you ever wrapped a gift so carefully, smiling to yourself, only because you imagined the joy on someone else's face, and never once thought that the same gift could later become the reason for your deepest humiliation? That morning, as sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of my small apartment, I sat at the table with a deep blue jewelry box in front of me, my old fingers trembling slightly, sigh not from weakness but from emotion. Because inside that box lay the one thing I had protected for decades, something I once promised would stay in the family no matter how hard life became, and today, on my grandson Leo's birthday, I was finally going to pass it down. Ha ha ha, funny how the happiest decisions sometimes lead us straight into heartbreak, isn't it? The pendant inside was simple to anyone who didn't know its story, just a green jade piece shaped like a teardrop, smooth, cool, and glowing softly when light touched it, but to me it carried memories of my husband, of struggles. Of nights sewing clothes until my eyes burned just so my son Michael could have school books like other children, and as I wrapped the box again and again because the paper kept slipping from my stiff fingers, I couldn't help remembering how life had once been so different, when Michael was small and birthdays meant homemade cake, balloons taped badly to walls, and laughter filling our tiny home. Not these grand hotel parties his wife Jessica now preferred, saying image mattered, saying successful families celebrated big, and maybe she was right, but sometimes big celebrations make small people feel even smaller, don't they? I stood slowly, adjusting the blue dress Michael had gifted me last year, still almost new because I rarely had occasions to wear it, and looked into the mirror where a tired but hopeful old woman stared back. Wrinkles like maps of sacrifices, silver hair tied neatly, eyes still searching for the same love she once saw in her son when he clung to her after nightmares, weeping until she hugged him tight, and I whispered softly, "Today will be good." Even though somewhere inside, a tiny worry poked at my heart because lately Michael seemed distant, always busy, always careful with words whenever Jessica was around, as if choosing peace over truth. And when he knocked on my door saying, "Mom, are you ready?" His smile looked warm but his eyes avoided mine, and I didn't ask why because mothers sometimes pretend not to see pain just to protect their children from guilt. You understand that, right? The ride to the hotel felt longer than usual, the city passing by in shiny reflections, and Michael talked about traffic and business and guests coming from important families while I nodded, clutching my handbag where the gift rested, wondering if Leo would like something so simple when his friends probably brought expensive toys and gadgets, but then I remembered his innocent hugs, the way he still called me grandma with pure joy, awe, and my heart softened again. Telling myself love mattered more than money, even if the world seemed to forget that lesson these days, and as we entered the grand lobby with shining marble floors and sparkling chandeliers, people dressed elegantly walked past without noticing me, and suddenly memories hit me of cooking Leo's favorite dishes last year in my own kitchen, where he helped stir soup and laughed when flour covered his nose, ha ha ha. Such small moments, yet they felt bigger than any luxury haul, and I wondered quietly if success sometimes takes families away from simple happiness, making them strangers to their own past. And when Leo finally saw me and ran across the hall shouting, "Grandma," throwing himself into my arms, that single moment erased every worry, every doubt, every lonely night, because in his hug I still felt needed, still felt loved. And I whispered blessings into his hair, promising silently that no matter how life changed, I would always be there for him, even if someday he forgot me, because that is what grandparents do, we love without asking for anything back. Don't we? Jessica soon walked over, perfect smile, perfect dress, perfect manners in front of guests, thanking me politely while already scanning the room for important people, and I handed her the wrapped gift, my heart beating strangely fast. Unsure why nervousness crept in when this was supposed to be a happy day, and as she placed the gift aside saying guests would soon gather, I felt something invisible shift in the air, like calm before an unseen storm, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overthinking, that today was Leo's day, not mine, and still, as lights dimmed and music played while speeches began. And I sat quietly at a distant table watching my son laugh proudly beside his successful wife. A question rose slowly in my chest, one I tried hard to ignore: when exactly did I become a guest in my own child's life? And little did I know, the moment they would call me on stage to give my gift would change everything, because sometimes the smallest actions reveal the biggest truths, and what happened next would leave everyone in that hall speechless, and trust me, the real story begins when a mother's heart finally breaks. Have you ever sat in a crowded room full of laughter and music, yet felt completely invisible, like you were watching your own family from far away instead of being part of it? That was exactly how I felt sitting at the corner table of that huge ballroom, the lights glowing above, waiters walking around with shining trays, guests laughing loudly, children running in fancy clothes, and music playing softly in the background while I held my handbag tightly on my lap, sigh, telling myself again and again that today was about Leo, not about my feelings. And when I looked toward the stage where a giant screen showed photos of his childhood, my heart warmed seeing him grow from a tiny baby into the cheerful boy he is now, but at the same time something inside me ached. Because in every picture it was Michael and Jessica smiling proudly beside him, and I realized that in this new version of their perfect life, there wasn't much space left for an old mother sitting quietly in the corner, ha ha ha. Funny how life changes, isn't it? Years ago, birthday parties meant cooking all day, blowing balloons until my cheeks hurt, neighbors dropping by, and Michael hugging me tightly saying, "Mom, this is the best day ever," and now celebrations were grand, expensive, elegant yet somehow colder, and as I watched Jessica walk confidently between guests, greeting business partners and friends, her voice cheerful and loud, I noticed how naturally she belonged in this world of wealth and status. While I kept wondering if anyone here even knew who I was, because the people at my table only nodded politely before going back to conversations about foreign vacations, investments, private schools. Things far beyond my simple life, and I smiled quietly, pretending to listen, but my mind wandered back to memories of sewing clothes late into the night while Michael slept beside me, weeping sometimes from exhaustion but still waking up smiling because my son needed me, and I wondered, does he remember those days too, or has success slowly erased them? Suddenly the lights dimmed further and a spotlight lit the stage, music changing into something dramatic, and Jessica walked up confidently, microphone in hand, giving a speech about Leo's journey, about how proud they were as parents, how much they worked to give him the best future, and guests clapped loudly while videos played behind her, showing Leo's school achievements, vacations, happy family moments, and I clapped too, truly proud of my grandson. But a tiny sting hit my chest seeing how complete their picture looked without me in it, as if my role had quietly faded away, and when Michael joined them on stage smiling, looking successful in his sharp suit. My eyes became moist remembering the little boy who once cried because kids teased him for wearing patched clothes, and I whispered softly, "You did well, my son," even though he couldn't hear me over the applause. And then came the gift presentation, guests lining up one by one to give Leo expensive presents, huge boxes wrapped beautifully, gaming consoles, designer shoes, gold chains, and each gift made the crowd cheer louder. Cameras flashing everywhere, and I suddenly felt nervous, because my small wrapped box now seemed so tiny compared to the mountain of luxury gifts piling beside the stage, and a thought slipped into my mind. What if Leo felt embarrassed receiving something so simple in front of his friends? But then I remembered his innocent smile and told myself love mattered more than price tags, didn't it? My heart beat faster as Jessica announced loudly, "And now Leo's grandmother will come up to give her gift." And suddenly hundreds of eyes turned toward me, making my legs feel weak as I stood slowly, clutching my handbag, each step toward the stage feeling heavier than the last. Sigh, why did I feel so uneasy when this was supposed to be a joyful moment? Leo smiled brightly as I approached, reaching his hands toward me, and my heart melted seeing his excitement, and I handed him the small box, my voice trembling as I wished him happiness and health, telling him this gift carried family blessings, and for a brief second everything felt right, warm, peaceful, until I noticed Jessica's smile stiffen slightly as she took the box from Leo's hands, her eyes narrowing just a little. And something cold crawled down my spine, a warning my heart tried to give me, but I ignored it, convincing myself I was imagining things, because surely in front of so many people, no one would say or do anything hurtful, right? The crowd waited expectantly as she began unwrapping the gift, paper tearing loudly into the microphone, and suddenly the room grew strangely quiet, as if everyone sensed something unusual about to happen. And I stood there smiling nervously, unaware that in just a few seconds, my simple act of love would turn into the most humiliating moment of my life, and trust me, what happened next didn't just change the mood of the party, it changed everything that followed, because sometimes one sentence spoken publicly can destroy years of silent sacrifice, and when you hear what Jessica said next, you'll understand why I walked out without looking back, and why 30 minutes later, that grand celebration turned into complete chaos. Have you ever smiled in front of a crowd, while your heart quietly begged the ground to open and swallow you whole? That was exactly how I stood there on the stage, under those bright lights, hundreds of faces watching, cameras pointed, laughter slowly fading into silence as Jessica opened my little gift box in front of everyone, and for one tiny hopeful second, I truly believed she would simply hand it back to Leo and let the moment pass peacefully. Sigh, but life doesn't always give us peaceful endings, does it? The wrapping paper fell away and the blue velvet box appeared in her hand, and she opened it slowly, the jade pendant catching the spotlight, glowing softly, beautiful in its quiet simplicity, and Leo leaned forward excitedly, saying, "Wow, Grandma," but before he could even touch it, Jessica's smile changed, just slightly, yet enough for my heart to freeze, and she lifted the pendant between two fingers as if inspecting something unpleasant, and then, Into the microphone that carried her voice across the entire hall, she laughed lightly and said, "Mom, where did you buy this?" "Some street market." A few people chuckled nervously, unsure how to react, and my chest tightened as I tried to speak, my voice barely forming. It's a family." But she cut me off smoothly, still smiling, her voice sharper now. "Honestly, Leo can't wear something like this. It looks cheap." The word hit me harder than a slap, and suddenly whispers spread through the crowd, people exchanging looks, some pretending not to listen while others stared openly, and I saw Michael's face go pale beside her. Yet he remained silent, frozen, caught between embarrassment and fear of confrontation. And in that moment, the little boy who once protected me from stray dogs seemed to disappear completely, replaced by a man afraid to challenge his own wife in public. Ha ha ha, funny how children grow up, isn't it? My ears buzzed as Jessica continued casually, "Mom, next time please don't bring this kind of stuff to events like this. It's embarrassing." And before my mind could even process what was happening, she casually tossed the jewelry box behind her, and it landed with a hollow thud straight into a trash can beside the stage, right there in front of everyone. And for a second, time stopped, no one moved, no one spoke, and the silence became heavier than any insult, and I saw Leo's confused eyes dart between us while Michael finally whispered, "Jessica," but too late, the damage was done. And my cheeks burned as tears threatened to fall, yet somehow, some strange pride kept them from escaping, because I refused to cry in front of strangers, refused to let them see how deeply it hurt, and instead I took a slow breath, turned around and walked toward the trash can, each step echoing in the silent ballroom, my old knees trembling, sigh, but my hands steady as I bent down and picked up the box, brushing invisible dust from it as if protecting something fragile, and when I opened it quickly to check, the pendant still lay peacefully inside, untouched, as if unaware of the humiliation surrounding it, and gently, quietly, I closed the lid and placed it back into my handbag, not looking at anyone, not saying a word, because sometimes silence carries more dignity than arguments, doesn't it? As I turned toward the exit, I heard Michael call softly behind me, "Mom, wait." But his voice lacked the courage to follow me, and no footsteps came after me, not his, not Jessica's, no one's. And that realization hurt more than the insult itself, because in that moment I understood something clearly. I was alone, completely alone, even in a room full of family, and when the hotel doors opened and warm night air hit my face, my chest finally broke, and tears rolled down quietly as I stood on the sidewalk unsure where to go. Ha ha ha, imagine that, an old woman dressed nicely for a celebration, now standing outside like an unwanted guest after her own grandson's birthday, and when a taxi driver asked gently, "Where to, ma'am?" the only place I could think of was home. Back to the small retirement apartment where no one judged cheap gifts, where memories still respected sacrifices, and as the city lights passed outside the window, I clutched my handbag tightly, feeling the weight of that pendant heavier than ever, not because of money, but because of what it represented, love that had just been thrown into the trash, and I whispered to myself through silent weeping, it's okay," even though deep down I knew something had changed forever tonight, and little did I know, while I was leaving quietly, something unexpected was about to unfold back at that grand party. Something that would turn their perfect celebration upside down, because sometimes when respect is thrown away, chaos follows close behind, and trust me, 30 minutes later, no one in that ballroom was thinking about gifts anymore. Have you ever smiled in front of a crowd, while your heart quietly begged the ground to open and swallow you whole? That was exactly how I stood there on the stage, under those bright lights, hundreds of faces watching, cameras pointed, laughter slowly fading into silence as Jessica opened my little gift box in front of everyone. And for one tiny hopeful second, I truly believed she would simply hand it back to Leo and let the moment pass peacefully. Sigh, but life doesn't always give us peaceful endings, does it? The wrapping paper fell away and the blue velvet box appeared in her hand, and she opened it slowly, the jade pendant catching the spotlight, glowing softly, beautiful in its quiet simplicity, and Leo leaned forward excitedly, saying, "Wow, Grandma," but before he could even touch it, Jessica's smile changed, just slightly, yet enough for my heart to freeze, and she lifted the pendant between two fingers as if inspecting something unpleasant, and then, into the microphone that carried her voice across the entire hall, she laughed lightly and said, "Mom, where did you buy this?" "Some street market." A few people chuckled nervously, unsure how to react, and my chest tightened as I tried to speak, my voice barely forming, It's a family." But she cut me off smoothly, still smiling, her voice sharper now, "Honestly, Leo can't wear something like this. It looks cheap." The word hit me harder than a slap, and suddenly whispers spread through the crowd, people exchanging looks, some pretending not to listen while others stared openly, and I saw Michael's face go pale beside her. Yet he remained silent, frozen, caught between embarrassment and fear of confrontation, and in that moment, the little boy who once protected me from stray dogs seemed to disappear completely, replaced by a man afraid to challenge his own wife in public. Ha ha ha, funny how children grow up, isn't it? My ears buzzed as Jessica continued casually, Mom, next time please don't bring this kind of stuff to events like this. It's embarrassing, and before my mind could even process what was happening, she casually tossed the jewelry box behind her, and it landed with a hollow thud straight into a trash can beside the stage, right there in front of everyone. And for a second, time stopped, no one moved, no one spoke, and the silence became heavier than any insult, and I saw Leo's confused eyes dart between us while Michael finally whispered, Jessica, but too late, the damage was done. And my cheeks burned as tears threatened to fall, yet somehow, some strange pride kept them from escaping, because I refused to cry in front of strangers, refused to let them see how deeply it hurt, and instead I took a slow breath, turned around and walked toward the trash can, each step echoing in the silent ballroom, my old knees trembling, sigh, but my hands steady as I bent down and picked up the box, brushing invisible dust from it as if protecting something fragile, and when I opened it quickly to check, the pendant still lay peacefully inside, untouched, as if unaware of the humiliation surrounding it, and gently, quietly. I closed the lid and placed it back into my handbag, not looking at anyone, not saying a word, because sometimes silence carries more dignity than arguments, doesn't it? As I turned toward the exit, I heard Michael call softly behind me, Mom, wait. But his voice lacked the courage to follow me, and no footsteps came after me, not his, not Jessica's, no one's. And that realization hurt more than the insult itself, because in that moment I understood something clearly. I was alone, completely alone, even in a room full of family, and when the hotel doors opened and warm night air hit my face, my chest finally broke, and tears rolled down quietly as I stood on the sidewalk unsure where to go. Ha ha ha, imagine that, an old woman dressed nicely for a celebration, now standing outside like an unwanted guest after her own grandson's birthday, and when a taxi driver asked gently, Where to, ma'am? The only place I could think of was home. Back to the small retirement apartment where no one judged cheap gifts, where memories still respected sacrifices, and as the city lights passed outside the window, I clutched my handbag tightly, feeling the weight of that pendant heavier than ever, not because of money, but because of what it represented, love that had just been thrown into the trash, and I whispered to myself through silent weeping. It's okay, even though deep down I knew something had changed forever tonight, and little did I know, while I was leaving quietly, something unexpected was about to unfold back at that grand party. Something that would turn their perfect celebration upside down, because sometimes when respect is thrown away, chaos follows close behind, and trust me, 30 minutes later, no one in that ballroom was thinking about gifts anymore. Have you ever discovered that the one thing people laughed at was actually worth more than everything they proudly showed off? That night, sitting in Arthur's small living room with a warm cup of tea in my trembling hands, I thought the worst part of the day was already behind me. Sigh, humiliation at the party, my son's silence, the chaos that followed. And now just quiet exhaustion settling in my bones, but life, it seems, wasn't done surprising me yet, because Arthur suddenly leaned forward, squinting at the jewelry box resting in my lap, and asked, Can I see the pendant? At first I hesitated, unsure why he seemed so curious, but then I opened the box and handed it to him, and under the soft yellow light of his table lamp the jade glowed faintly. Its green surface calm and elegant, and Arthur's expression changed completely, his sleepy old man face suddenly alert, almost shocked, and he muttered, This is not cheap, and I actually laughed quietly. Ha ha ha, after the night I'd had, the idea sounded almost ridiculous, and I told him Jessica called it street junk, but Arthur shook his head firmly and said, I worked in jade processing factories when I was young. I've seen thousands of pieces. This quality, this color, it's rare, and suddenly my heart beat faster because his tone carried certainty, not comfort, and he continued carefully, pointing at the faint lightning-like line inside the stone, See this streak. Natural but perfectly placed. Pieces like this were carved decades ago by masters. Families kept them as treasures, and I stared at the pendant again, confused, because for over 40 years I had only seen it as sentimental, something precious emotionally but not financially. Something I could never sell even during my hardest days raising Michael alone, and Arthur went to his shelf, rummaged through old albums, and returned with a faded photograph of a young woman wearing a similar jade pendant, explaining it belonged to his own mother, lost long ago, and suddenly memories rushed back to me of my mother-in-law placing the pendant in my palm after I married Daniel, telling me it was passed down generations, and how I kept it safe even when money was tight, even when selling it might have made life easier, sigh, because some things aren't meant to be sold, right? Arthur leaned back, shaking his head slowly, saying, Your daughter-in-law made a fool of herself tonight, and for the first time since leaving the party, a tiny spark of pride flickered in my chest, not because the pendant might be valuable, but because love and tradition had just been insulted publicly, and somehow the universe seemed to be correcting that mistake quietly, And yet, sadness remained because Leo never even received his grandmother's gift properly, and I whispered, almost to myself, what matters isn't price, it's meaning, and Arthur nodded, understanding perfectly, and then suddenly added something unexpected, be careful now. If someone realizes how valuable this is, they'll come after it, and I frowned, wondering who would even know about it, because to everyone at the party it was just a cheap embarrassment, right? But Arthur just shrugged and said, rich people always know where value hides, and strangely, his words left a cold feeling in my stomach, like a storm forming far away, unseen but approaching slowly. And at that moment my phone buzzed again, making me jump slightly, and when I checked, it was Michael once more, sending a message saying Leo was resting, Jessica's father had been hospitalized, and everything was chaotic. And again there was no mention of what happened to me on stage, just practical updates, sigh, and I realized maybe expecting him to defend me was pointless now. Because his life was tangled with Jessica's family in ways I didn't fully understand, and after tea, when I finally returned to my apartment, placing the pendant back under my pillow like I used to for safekeeping. Exhaustion pulled at my body, yet sleep refused to come because Arthur's words echoed repeatedly in my mind. This is rare, families kept them as treasures, people come after value. And I wondered quietly if tonight's humiliation was just an unfortunate event or the beginning of something much bigger, because sometimes what looks like an ending is only the start of deeper trouble. And as I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, I had no idea that someone powerful, someone connected directly to Jessica's family, had already taken interest in the pendant, and trust me, when you see who comes knocking next, you'll realize that the birthday party disaster was only the first domino to fall, because when money and family secrets mix, things rarely stay peaceful for long, and what happened the next day proved that the real battle was only beginning. Have you ever opened your door expecting an ordinary visitor, only to realize the person standing there could change everything in your life? The morning after Arthur told me the pendant might actually be valuable, I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, sigh, because what difference would money make at my age, right? I made my simple breakfast, watered the small plants on my balcony, and told myself the worst drama was over, that life would quietly return to normal, but peace, it seems, had no intention of visiting me anytime soon. Because just as I finished washing my cup, the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected, and when I opened the door my breath caught slightly, seeing Jessica's father, Richard, standing there in his expensive suit, polished shoes, holding a leather briefcase, smiling politely as if nothing strange had ever happened between our families, and for a moment I almost asked if he had the wrong apartment, because men like him didn't visit places like mine. Yet there he was, saying calmly, Mrs. Miller, may I come in? His tone was respectful, but his eyes were calculating, scanning everything quietly, and though I felt uneasy, manners made me step aside and let him enter. And he looked around my modest living room with polite curiosity, the peeling wallpaper, old sofa, faded curtains, all things Jessica probably hated, and after sitting down, he opened his briefcase and took out something that made my heart skip, my blue velvet jewelry box. For a second my mind went blank and I asked quietly, how did you get that? Richard smiled smoothly and said, after the incident last night the staff cleaned the hall. I asked them to keep the item safe. It seemed important, and he pushed the box toward me across the table, and relief mixed with suspicion filled my chest as I opened it quickly, confirming the pendant still lay inside, safe, untouched, and before I could thank him, he leaned forward slightly and said, Mrs. Miller, do you know what you have here? I shook my head slowly, telling him it was just a family heirloom, passed down without much explanation, and his smile widened slightly, almost pleased, as if hearing exactly what he expected, and then he spoke words that made my pulse quicken. This pendant was carved by a master jade artist nearly a century ago. Pieces like this rarely appear on the market. Experts would pay millions for it. Millions. The number echoed in my head, absurd, unbelievable, and I almost laughed thinking he was exaggerating, but his serious expression told me he wasn't joking, and he continued calmly, I collect antiques. When I saw it at the party, I recognized its quality immediately, and suddenly Arthur's warning from last night returned to me, rich people know where value hides. And my stomach tightened as I realized Richard didn't come simply to return the pendant, and as if reading my thoughts he said smoothly, I would like to buy it from you, placing his business card on the table. His voice casual but confident, as if this was just another normal transaction, but something inside me resisted immediately, and I shook my head, saying softly, it's not for sale. It belongs to my grandson, and for the first time his smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of mild annoyance quickly hidden again, and he leaned back, saying gently, Mrs. Miller, at your age, money could make life easier. Better care, comfort, security. Why keep something you don't need? His words sounded reasonable, yet they felt wrong because the pendant wasn't about money. It carried memories, sacrifices, promises, and I answered firmly, "Some things are not meant to be sold." And silence filled the room for a few seconds before he sighed lightly, as if dealing with a stubborn child, and stood up to leave. But before reaching the door, he turned back and asked casually, "By the way, do you have any other pieces like this in your family?" The question startled me, and instinctively I answered no, though memories flickered faintly of old boxes stored away long ago, and he studied my face for a moment, clearly not fully convinced, before smiling again and saying, "If you change your mind, call me." Offers like this don't wait forever, and after he left, the apartment suddenly felt colder, quieter, and I sat down slowly, realizing something unsettling: powerful people didn't chase old jewelry unless they desperately needed it. And later that evening, when Michael called mentioning his father-in-law's company facing financial troubles, projects failing, loans denied, everything suddenly made sense, and I whispered softly, "So that's why, because Richard didn't want the pendant for beauty or collection. He needed money, urgently, and now my so-called cheap gift had become part of a much bigger problem." And as night fell, a strange worry crept into my heart, because when desperate people chase something valuable, they rarely give up easily, and trust me. What Richard did next proved that the real danger wasn't humiliation or money. It was how far people would go when they believed something valuable belonged to them. And soon, events would force me to make decisions I never imagined making at this stage of my life, because sometimes protecting family means stepping into battles you never wanted to fight. Have you ever walked into a hospital for a routine checkup and walked out carrying a secret that changes how you see every single day after that? A few days after Richard's strange visit, life seemed calm on the surface again, yet inside me something restless kept growing. Maybe it was the stress, maybe the humiliation still lingering in my chest. Or maybe it was the dull pain under my ribs that I had been ignoring for months, telling myself it was just old age, just normal weakness. Ha ha ha. We old people are experts at pretending nothing is wrong, aren't we? But that morning, remembering the hospital's earlier call about follow-up tests, I finally forced myself to go, telling no one, not Michael, not Arthur, because why worry others before knowing anything for sure, right? The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and quiet fear, people sitting silently, waiting for results that could change their lives. And as I sat clutching my medical file, my heart beat strangely fast, not from fear exactly, but from a strange intuition that something serious waited ahead. And when the doctor finally called my name and gestured for me to sit, his face already carried the answer before his mouth even opened, and he spoke gently, carefully choosing words, saying the scans showed a mass on my liver, that further tests confirmed it was cancer, and not early, not treatable easily, but already advanced, late stage, and his voice kept talking about options, treatments, months, probabilities, but everything after those words blurred into distant noise, because inside my head only one sentence echoed, late stage, and suddenly the world felt very quiet, and I nodded slowly, pretending calm while my fingers gripped the chair tightly, asking the only thing that mattered, how long. And the doctor hesitated before saying softly, 6 to 9 months, maybe more with treatment, and somehow I thanked him politely. As if he had given ordinary advice, walked out of his office, and found myself standing outside under bright sunlight that suddenly felt too harsh, too alive compared to the heaviness inside me, and I whispered, 6 months, trying to imagine what 6 months even looked like when measured against an entire lifetime. Ha ha ha, funny how time feels endless until someone puts a number on it, isn't it? On the bus ride home, people chatted normally around me, students laughed, someone argued on the phone, life going on exactly as before, yet everything looked different now. Because suddenly every small thing felt precious. The sunlight on buildings, the noise of traffic, even the tired driver humming quietly, and I wondered what I should do with whatever time remained. Tell Michael immediately or stay silent so he could live peacefully, spend my days in hospital beds or at home where memories lived, protect the heirloom or simply sell it and remove trouble from everyone's life. And my thoughts tangled until exhaustion made my eyes sting, and by the time I reached home, one decision became clear. I would not waste my final months worrying about money or pride. I would spend them protecting what mattered most. My son and my grandson, because mothers don't stop worrying even when time runs short, do they? That evening Michael called again, sounding exhausted, explaining Jessica's father was still hospitalized and business troubles were worsening. Leo was being neglected between hospital visits and work, and without thinking I offered, "Let Leo stay with me for a few days," and relief filled his voice immediately, as if he had been waiting for someone to say that, and the next afternoon Leo arrived at my apartment full of energy, his school bag bouncing as he ran inside shouting, "Grandma," turning my quiet home upside down with laughter, toys, questions, and noise, ha ha ha, and strangely, for the first time in days, My heart felt light again cooking his favorite meals, helping with homework, listening to stories about school fights and friends, because ordinary moments suddenly became priceless knowing how few of them remained, and one evening. While I unconsciously pressed my aching side, Leo noticed and asked innocently, "Grandma, why does your tummy always hurt?" And I quickly smiled, saying it was nothing, old people problems, but then he whispered seriously, "Don't worry. When I grow up, I'll protect you," and those simple words almost broke me, tears forming as I hugged him tightly, awe because children promise love so easily, without knowing how complicated life becomes later. And in that moment, I silently decided something important. Before I left this world, I would make sure Leo understood our family's values: kindness, honesty, respect, things money could never buy, because someday when wealth fades, those are what remain, right? But peace didn't last long, because the next day in the park, while Leo played happily, I accidentally overheard Jessica arguing on her phone nearby, complaining that I was interfering, saying our family must be hiding something valuable, repeating her father's suspicions, and suddenly I realized something chilling. This fight wasn't just about pride or misunderstandings anymore, they were searching for something. And my illness, the pendant, Leo. Everything was becoming connected in ways I didn't yet understand, and when Jessica later stormed over angrily, accusing me of taking her son without permission and dragging Leo away despite his crying protests, my heart shattered watching him reach back toward me shouting, "Grandma," while she pulled him away, and I returned home shaken. Not from fear of Jessica, but from a terrifying realization: if I disappeared tomorrow, who would teach Leo kindness? Who would protect him from becoming cold like the adults around him? And that night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, the doctor's words echoing again, I finally accepted the truth: my time was limited, and the real battle ahead wasn't about money or humiliation. It was about protecting family before it was too late, and trust me, the next step would force me to reveal everything to Michael, because some truths cannot stay hidden forever, especially when time is running out. Have you ever reached a point where keeping quiet feels more dangerous than finally telling the truth? That night after Jessica dragged Leo away from the park, his small voice still echoing in my ears, crying "Grandma," while his mother pulled him into the car, I returned home feeling weaker than ever. Not because of my illness, but because of the fear that someday Leo might grow up believing I never cared enough to fight for him. And I sat alone in my dim living room, staring at the pendant lying on the table, wondering how something so small had suddenly become the center of so many problems: humiliation, greed, family tension, and now even suspicion. And for the first time, I realized that staying silent was no longer protecting anyone. It was only allowing others to control everything, and if my time truly was limited, I had no right to waste it pretending everything was fine. Ha ha ha. Funny how people become brave only when they realize they have nothing left to lose. Isn't it? My phone rang late in the evening, Michael's tired voice on the other end, asking gently if Jessica had come to my place earlier, and I answered calmly, telling him she took Leo home, and he sighed deeply, apologizing for her behavior, explaining her father's condition was worsening, doctors suspecting cancer now, and suddenly everything connected in my mind: Richard's desperation for money, his obsession with the pendant, his constant visits. And fear replaced anger, because desperate people make dangerous decisions, don't they? For a moment I hesitated, wondering whether telling Michael everything would destroy his already fragile marriage, but then I remembered the doctor's words again: 6 to 9 months, and I knew I couldn't carry secrets anymore, so I told him quietly, "Michael, we need to talk. Just you and me." "Tomorrow." Silence followed, heavy and uncertain, before he finally agreed, his voice tense, probably sensing something serious, and after hanging up, I lay in bed unable to sleep, the ceiling fan spinning slowly above while memories flooded back: Michael as a baby in my arms, his first day of school, the nights he cried after his father died, promising he would grow up strong for me. And tears slid quietly into my pillow, because somewhere along the way, life had pulled us apart without either of us noticing, and now I wondered if it was already too late to fix things. But deep inside, a mother's hope never truly dies, does it? The next afternoon Michael arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, worry written across his face as he sat down and asked directly, "Mom, what's going on?" And for a moment words refused to come out. Because how do you tell your child you're dying without breaking their heart? Ha ha ha, life gives no instructions for moments like this. And instead of answering immediately, I took out Daniel's old diary from the drawer, the one containing the entry about our family's hidden heirlooms, and handed it to him, watching confusion cross his face as he read about treasures hidden long ago, about family artifacts lost and protected through generations. And when he finished, he looked up shocked, asking if it was true, and I explained quietly how Richard seemed to know about our family's valuables, how he tried to buy the pendant, how his business troubles made everything suspicious. And slowly Michael's expression changed from confusion to disbelief, pacing around the room saying it sounded impossible, that Jessica would never marry him for such reasons. And I gently reminded him how quickly Richard recognized the pendant's value, how he investigated my health, how everything felt planned, and silence filled the apartment as realization slowly settled into his eyes. And before I could continue, Michael suddenly asked in a trembling voice, "Mom, is something wrong with your health too?" And my heart sank because somehow he already knew, and when he grabbed my bag searching for answers. Finding the medical report before I could stop him, his face collapsed as he read the words late-stage liver cancer, and for the first time since childhood, my grown son broke down completely, kneeling beside me, crying into my lap saying, "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" And I stroked his hair gently, weeping silently myself, whispering, "Because you already had too much to worry about," and in that moment all anger disappeared, leaving only love between mother and son, pure and painful, and when he looked up again, eyes red but determined, he said firmly, "I'll fix this. I'll find out the truth about everything. And I won't let anyone hurt you again." And hearing those words felt like sunlight breaking through dark clouds, because despite everything, my son was still there, still the good boy I raised, just lost for a while in someone else's world. And yet, even as relief warmed my chest, fear lingered, because standing against Jessica's powerful family would not be easy, and as Michael left promising to investigate both my treatment options and Richard's motives. I sat quietly by the window watching him disappear into the evening crowd, knowing something had shifted permanently between us, because once truth comes out, nothing remains the same, and trust me. What Michael discovered next would prove that this wasn't just family misunderstanding. It was a carefully hidden plan waiting to explode, and the consequences would shake everyone involved more than anyone expected. Have you ever learned a truth so painful that it makes you question the last 10 years of your life? The day after Michael left my apartment promising to uncover everything, I tried to distract myself with ordinary things, cleaning shelves, watering plants, folding clothes slowly. Sigh, but my mind kept drifting back to his shocked face when he read my medical report, and the determination in his eyes when he said he would protect me, because for the first time in years. My son sounded like the brave boy who once stood in front of bullies twice his size just to defend a weaker friend. Ha ha ha, life really does circle back sometimes, doesn't it? By evening, Michael returned unexpectedly, his expression darker than before, exhaustion mixed with anger, and without even removing his shoes, he sat down heavily and said, "Mom, things are worse than we thought." And my heart tightened instantly as he explained how he had traveled to our old hometown after reading Daniel's diary, searching for the house where his grandfather supposedly hid family valuables, hoping to understand why Richard seemed so obsessed with our family. And after hours of searching records and talking to villagers, he finally located the property, now abandoned and half collapsed. But when workers dug into the east wall exactly where the diary described, they found nothing. The iron box was gone, taken years ago, and when Michael asked locals if anyone suspicious had visited before, someone remembered a wealthy businessman buying the land 5 years earlier, a man matching Richard's description perfectly. And suddenly the truth became impossible to ignore. Richard had known about our family treasures long before Jessica even met Michael, and the room fell silent as my son whispered, almost to himself. "So my entire marriage," unable to finish the sentence, and watching his world crumble hurt more than any insult Jessica ever threw at me, because no mother wants her child to feel used or betrayed, and I reached out, telling him gently that love and Leo were still real, no matter how their relationship began, but Michael shook his head, saying Richard's company was drowning in debt, investors pulling out, banks refusing loans, and auctioning rare artifacts might be his only way to survive financially, meaning our pendant and any other heirlooms were not sentimental items to him but lifelines, and anger flashed across Michael's face as he added, "And now they want to control you too," explaining that Richard had already spoken to lawyers, claiming my illness affected my mental stability, planning to request legal guardianship so he and Jessica could manage my affairs, including valuables under the excuse of protecting me, and Arthur, who had been quietly listening nearby, cursed angrily saying it was outright theft disguised as concern. And I felt cold all over realizing how carefully everything was being arranged: humiliation at the party, interest in the pendant, sudden concern about my living alone, all part of a larger plan. And suddenly I felt less like a grandmother and more like a target. And when Michael added that Richard threatened him privately, saying if he opposed them, his position in Jessica's family business and even access to Leo could disappear, my heart clenched painfully because now my illness, family legacy, and grandson's future were tangled together. And yet, instead of fear, something stronger rose inside me: clarity, because when you know time is limited, you stop hesitating. And I told Michael calmly, then we fight, and he looked at me surprised, perhaps expecting fear, but I smiled faintly saying, I didn't survive raising you alone just to surrender now. And for the first time since learning about my condition, I felt strangely peaceful because protecting family mattered more than my own comfort, and Michael squeezed my hand, promising again that he would stand by me no matter what, even if it meant leaving Jessica's world behind. And later that night, as Leo unexpectedly arrived with Arthur because Jessica suddenly claimed she was too busy to keep him, the child ran into my arms laughing, completely unaware of the storm building around him, and while he played with old toys Michael once used, I watched quietly, realizing children remain innocent while adults fight over money and pride. And suddenly Leo asked, Grandma, will you always be here? And my throat tightened because honesty felt cruel yet lying felt worse, so I simply hugged him and whispered, as long as I can, knowing those words carried more weight than he understood. And after putting him to bed, Michael and I stayed awake discussing legal plans, evidence, possible recordings, ways to protect family property. And even the secret Daniel's diary mentioned that important documents might still be hidden inside the pendant itself, sealed long ago, something Richard might suspect but not fully know. Meaning the small piece of jade everyone mocked could still hold power capable of exposing truths buried for generations. And as midnight passed, Michael finally stood up saying he would find experts to examine the pendant and prepare legal defense before Richard made his next move. And as I lay down later, pain spreading slowly through my side, one final thought kept me awake. This battle was no longer about revenge or pride. It was about survival, dignity, and ensuring Leo inherited something better than greed and manipulation. And trust me, the final confrontation coming next would test every bond in our family, because when secrets, money, and limited time collide, the ending is never simple, and what happened next would decide who truly valued family and who only valued wealth. Have you ever stood at the end of a long road, looking back at everything you survived, and realized that peace doesn't come from winning fights but from protecting what truly matters? The final weeks felt strangely calm after so much chaos, as if life itself understood I needed quiet before saying goodbye to many things, and I spent those days back in our old apartment. The small place where Michael grew up, sunlight still falling through thin curtains exactly the same way it did 20 years ago, and sometimes I would sit on the sofa watching Leo play on the floor, laughing loudly over toy cars and cartoons, unaware that the adults around him were fighting invisible battles over money, pride, and family legacy. Children really live in a different, kinder world, don't they? Michael kept his promise, standing firm against Richard and Jessica's attempts to control everything, and though arguments erupted between them, though threats about business and custody came and went, something important had already changed. My son had finally chosen his own conscience over fear, and even Jessica, exhausted by her father's failing health and collapsing business empire, slowly stopped fighting, perhaps realizing that forcing love never truly works. And one evening she even visited quietly, without makeup, without pride, apologizing awkwardly for what happened at Leo's party, saying stress and pressure made her cruel. And while the wound still hurt, I nodded gently because carrying anger into the end of life feels heavier than forgiveness, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Michael met with experts who carefully examined the pendant and confirmed what Daniel's diary hinted at. Inside the jade, sealed using an ancient technique, lay a tiny rolled document, and when it was carefully extracted, damaged slightly but still readable, it revealed old land deeds and official records proving our ancestors once owned significant property seized during historical upheavals, documents worth less money today than emotional meaning, yet powerful enough to explain why Richard searched so desperately for them. And seeing Michael hold those fragile papers, his expression filled with both pride and sadness, I realized the real inheritance wasn't wealth but identity, proof that our family once stood with dignity before life scattered us across hardship. And later that night, as pain grew stronger in my body and exhaustion made breathing harder, I called Leo to sit beside me, showing him the pendant one last time, telling him softly that heirlooms aren't just objects but reminders of who we are, that kindness matters more than money, that success means nothing without respect. And Leo listened seriously, his small hand holding mine, promising again that he would grow up strong and protect family. And I smiled knowing he didn't yet understand the weight of his words, but someday he would. And when Michael returned from settling legal matters, he knelt beside me like when he was a child, apologizing again for all the years he failed to notice my loneliness, and I laughed weakly telling him mothers don't keep score. We only hope our children eventually find their way back, and in that quiet room filled with fading sunlight, I felt something settle peacefully inside me, because despite humiliation, betrayal, illness, and conflict, Love had somehow survived, and maybe that was enough, and on my final evening strong enough to sit by the window, I watched Leo and Michael arguing playfully about homework at the small kitchen table, exactly like we once did. And for a moment time folded into itself, past and present blending together, and tears rolled gently down my cheeks, not from sadness but gratitude, because life had been hard, yes, but also meaningful. And when Leo suddenly ran over hugging me tightly saying, "Grandma, when I have a big house, you'll live with me forever," I laughed softly, weeping quietly, whispering, "I already do in your heart," and as night deepened, pain finally pushing me toward rest, I held the pendant one last time before giving it to Michael, telling him to pass it on when Leo understood its meaning, not its value, and when sleep slowly pulled me under. My last clear thought was simple: respect lost can sometimes be regained, love tested can still survive, and even when celebrations fall into chaos, families can still find their way back if someone chooses forgiveness over pride. And perhaps that was why everything happened the way it did, to remind us what truly matters, because in the end, parties end, money fades, but kindness and family remain. And if this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you miss, then subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes stories help us say the things we never found the courage to speak in real life. And remember, before it's too late, tell the people who raised you, loved you, and stood quietly behind your success that they still matter, because one day, the chair they used to sit in will be empty, and you'll wish you had said thank you just one more time.